You are now calling me Madame President. But there was a time when I was called a terrorist. The room falls silent. The woman who once hid in the desert to fight apartheid now sits in the highest office of her nation. Her voice does not tremble, but every word cuts through decades of pain, struggle, and survival. This is not just another interview. It is a confession and a confrontation with history itself. Namibia's new president, Nangolo Nandi-Ndaitwah, speaks with the calm certainty of someone who has seen freedom both won and stolen. She reminds the world that Africa's liberation is far from over. It has only changed its battlefield. From bullets to ballots, from independence to economics, the war continues. In 2025, as global powers redraw alliances and trade wars escalate, she asks a question no Western journalist dares to answer. Why is it that when Africa stands on her own, she is called dangerous? Her words echo beyond Windhoek. Across the continent, from Ouagadougou to Pretoria, her defiance resonates with millions who have grown weary of being told what freedom should look like. The same voices that once labeled Nelson Mandela, Thomas Sankara, and Ibrahim Traoré as radicals now label her the same. But history, she reminds us, has a way of clearing its own name. As she speaks, you can feel that this is no longer just Namibia's story. It is Africa's awakening, a reminder that sovereignty is not a slogan, but a daily act of courage. So before you scroll away, ask yourself, when does independence truly begin? When the colonizer leaves, or when the African stops asking for permission to be free? Watch till the end. If you believe that truth should never be censored, and that courage should never be mislabeled as terrorism, share this video. And if you believe that Africa's daughters deserve to speak without fear, subscribe. Because this time, Madam President is speaking for all of us. She begins not with anger, but with memory. There was a time, she recalls, when we were hunted like animals in our own land. Those who fought for independence were branded enemies of peace. Those who demanded equality were called extremists. And yet out of that persecution came a generation of unbreakable souls, people who learned that being misunderstood by the powerful is often the price of doing what is right. For Namibia's Madam President Nangolo Nandi-Ndaitwah, that truth defines her entire life. Once an underground freedom fighter, now a head of state, she carries the scars of Africa's first liberation and the vision for its second. When asked about Namibia's place in today's turbulent world, she speaks without hesitation. We take sides, but we take the side of peace, of fairness, of integrity. Her message is simple but defiant. Namibia will not be anyone's pawn. She warns that multilateralism itself is under threat, that the world is being divided again, not by ideology, but by influence. And yet she insists Namibia will not bow. It will choose its alliances by principle, not pressure. Her words sound diplomatic on paper, but beneath them lies a challenge, a subtle rebellion against a world order still shaped by its colonial ghosts. She knows it. The audience knows it. And perhaps that is why her statement feels heavier than politics. It is an echo of Africa's unfinished revolution. She goes on to describe how liberation movements across southern Africa are being targeted. There is an onslaught, she says, against those who remember what freedom cost. She lists them by name: ANC in South Africa, ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe, Frelimo in Mozambique, MPLA in Angola, and SWAPO in Namibia, movements that once fought side by side against apartheid. Today, she says, they face a new kind of attack: manipulation of elections, funding of opposition groups, and a media campaign designed to rewrite history. Those who were once sympathetic to our oppressors, she warns, are back, this time not with guns, but with cameras and headlines. It is not paranoia. It is experience. She remembers the days when Namibia's independence was dismissed as impossible, when international reporters stood on the border of Angola calling her comrades Marxist rebels. Today, the same headlines return, only with different words, different villains, but the same intent to shame Africans for choosing themselves. Then she pauses and her tone softens. We are part of the global village, she says, but we must find our space in it. That phrase, find our space, carries the weight of a continent still searching for its rightful seat at the table. She knows the danger of isolation, but she also knows the greater danger of submission. That is why she insists that Africa's second liberation cannot be won by diplomacy alone. It requires economic sovereignty, the ability to feed its people, to refine its own minerals, to decide its own future. Namibia, she explains, has been here before. The country's first independence came with flags and an anthem, but the second, the economic one, must come with factories, with ownership, with courage. We fought for political independence, she says. Now we fight for economic independence. It is not a slogan. It is a vow. And in those words, her audience hears the same rhythm that once moved Sankara in Ouagadougou and Nkrumah in Accra and Traore in Burkina Faso, the rhythm of a continent remembering its worth. The interviewer, visibly moved, leans forward. Madam President, does that mean Africa must stand alone? She smiles the kind of smile that comes from surviving everything. No, she replies. It means Africa must stand together. The room bursts into quiet applause, because everyone in that moment, even those far beyond Namibia, understands that what she's describing is no longer just policy. It is prophecy. The turning point of the interview comes quietly, almost unexpectedly. The journalist brings up a story published by a Western outlet during Namibia's 2024 elections. The headline had warned, "If Nandi-Ndaitwah takes over, it will be dangerous. She has a liberation mentality." The president doesn't flinch. Instead, she leans forward and answers with the calm of someone who has been through worse storms. "Yes," she says, "I have a liberation mentality. Because we are not yet free." That single sentence stops the conversation cold. It is the moment her diplomacy turns into defiance, the moment the interview becomes history. The Western media called her dangerous not because she was violent, but because she was independent. Because she dared to believe that Africa could write its own future without foreign approval. It is the same accusation once thrown at Nelson Mandela, the same suspicion that shadowed Thomas Sankara and Ibrahim Traoré, and now it follows her. But Nandi-Ndaitwah does not retreat. She answers every attack with a lesson, every insult with perspective. They called Mandela a terrorist, too, she reminds the audience. They will always label you when they fear your courage. Her voice trembles not with fear, but with the restrained fury of truth. When I was fighting in the bush, they called me a terrorist, but I was fighting for the independence of my people. Today they call me president. So nothing has changed except who is afraid of whom. The room erupts in applause. From that moment, the conversation moves beyond Namibia. It becomes a mirror held up to every African nation that still struggles between obedience and sovereignty. When asked about the growing anti-Western sentiment across Africa, she doesn't deny it. She reframes it. Each country must assess its own situation, she says. If an alliance no longer serves your vision, you must move. Her answer echoes the philosophy spreading from Ouagadougou to Bamako, the belief that freedom is not disloyalty. She refuses to condemn those who expelled foreign troops from their soil. Instead, she praises them for thinking strategically. If remaining where you are cannot help you grow, then move. That is wisdom, not rebellion. And then comes the moment that electrifies every African heart watching. The journalist mentions Palestine, the genocide, the suffering, the ceasefire. Her eyes narrow slightly and she answers without hesitation. What is happening in Gaza, she says, is genocide, and we cannot remain silent. Namibia, she reminds the audience, joined South Africa in taking Israel to the International Court of Justice. Her tone carries neither hatred nor rage, only moral clarity. We believe in negotiation. We believe in peace. But peace cannot exist where humanity is denied. That statement, coming from a woman once branded as an enemy of peace, is what makes it powerful. It is history correcting itself in real time. And then, without being prompted, she draws the line connecting all her experiences, from the Namib Desert to global diplomacy. We were once colonized by Germany. We know what genocide means. We remember. And because we remember, we must speak. Every word feels like it belongs in a textbook, not an interview. Her tone softens as she speaks of Namibia's first national remembrance for victims of German colonial violence. We did not celebrate, she says, we remembered. We remembered those who died because they were African. That is when the interview reaches its emotional summit, the convergence of memory, resistance, and dignity. A nation once silenced now speaks through its leader. The journalist, visibly shaken, whispers, "Madam President, do you think anyone will ever be held accountable?" She sighs deeply. "I wish the international community were strong enough to do that. But justice begins when we stop pretending not to see. In that moment, her calm turns into conviction. This is not the language of power, it is the language of healing. And as the interview closes that segment, one truth becomes unmistakable. Namibia is not merely surviving global politics. Under Madame President, it is teaching the world what integrity sounds like. In the weeks following that interview, Namibia witnessed something rare, a quiet revolution of the mind. Markets remained calm, but conversations across Windhoek's cafes, radio shows, and university halls began to shift. For the first time in decades, Namibians were not talking about what they lacked, but about what they could build. Madame President's words had touched something deeper than politics. They reignited the unfinished dream of independence. Across the country, murals began to appear, a young woman holding a hoe in one hand and the Namibian flag in the other, under the caption, "Economic Freedom Now." That phrase became the nation's new pulse. For decades, Namibia had enjoyed peace and relative stability, yet its wealth, diamonds, uranium, copper remained largely in foreign hands. The president's declaration, "We fought for political independence, now we fight for economic independence," was more than a slogan, it was an indictment of the past. She ordered a national review of all resource contracts, demanding transparency from multinational mining corporations. The reaction was immediate. Markets trembled, Western ambassadors warned of instability, and the local elite whispered that she was turning socialist. But on the streets, people called her Mama Namibia. Farmers in Oshakati began organizing cooperatives. Students in Windhoek launched study circles about economic sovereignty. Women's unions, long silent, started discussing local ownership of textile industries. The ripple effect was undeniable. The old fear of confronting power was fading. Her stance also reignited unity across southern Africa. In neighboring Angola, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique, former liberation movements praised her courage. The term Liberation Bloc 2.0 began circulating, a coalition of nations seeking not just independence, but equality in trade, banking, and defense. It mirrored what was already happening in the Sahel under Ibrahim Traoré and the AES alliance. The parallels were striking. Like Burkina Faso, Namibia was turning its memory into policy. Both nations were redefining sovereignty as something that lives in the stomachs of citizens, not in the speeches of politicians. Western commentators, however, saw danger. They accused her of aligning with Russia, of romanticizing anti-imperialism. But for the Namibian people, this was not ideology, it was necessity. Their economy, like many across Africa, had been shaped by unequal trade and dependency. And the president's partnership with Moscow was not about nostalgia. It was about access to technology, energy, and industrial know-how. Russia helped us win political freedom, she reminded Parliament. Now we work with them to win economic freedom. It was a statement of intent and a warning to those who believed Africa must always ask permission to prosper. At home, the effects were visible. State-run energy projects began partnering with universities to train engineers locally. Schools added new courses on African industrial history. Even the annual Independence Day celebration changed tone, fewer speeches, more public service, more remembrance. And perhaps most symbolically, the government inaugurated the first National Day of Remembrance for the victims of the German colonial genocide. On May 28, 2025, thousands gathered under the blazing Namibian sun. No parades, no fireworks, only silence, tears, and songs of resilience. The president stood among them, not above them. She bowed her head and said softly, "We are not here to celebrate genocide. We are here to promise that it will never happen again, not to us, not to anyone." In that moment, Namibia's pain became its power. Its history, once weaponized by others, became the foundation of its self-worth. For many outside observers, it was a small story, one nation remembering its dead. But for Africa, it was the beginning of a continental rebirth, proof that dignity can rebuild nations faster than money ever could. For Washington and Brussels, the rise of Madam President was unexpected. They had grown accustomed to quiet partners, leaders who signed aid packages with smiles and echoed speeches written elsewhere. But now, Namibia's calm yet unyielding voice was rewriting that script. When the U.S. president announced new global trade tariffs that rippled through southern Africa, reporters asked how Namibia would cope. Her answer was almost casual, but its meaning cut deep. Difficult times force us to think outside the box. If one door closes, Africa must learn to build its own house. Those words reached far beyond Windhoek. In African embassies from Washington to Berlin, diplomats whispered that something had shifted not through confrontation, but through confidence. For decades, U.S. foreign policy toward Africa had been a mix of charity and control help, but on our terms. But Madame President's tone challenged that assumption. She did not reject partnership. She redefined it. "We take side for peace, not for power," she said, and in that single line she turned moral ground into political leverage. Her critics in the West called her pro-Russian. Yet what she truly represented was post-dependence, a new generation of African leaders refusing to be cornered by Cold War loyalties. In interviews, she praised Russia not as a savior, but as a consistent ally. "When we were fighting apartheid, they stood with us. Now, as we fight economic colonization, they share technology and respect." That balanced gratitude without submission confused Western analysts used to binaries. They could not categorize her, and so they caricatured her. Meanwhile, Namibia's growing cooperation with BRICS nations drew cautious interest. Beijing offered new infrastructure deals. Moscow deepened energy partnerships. Even India proposed scholarships for Namibian scientists. But the real shift was not economic, it was psychological. For the first time in decades, Africa was negotiating as an equal. The very tone of diplomacy was changing, no longer a continent begging for aid, but one designing its own alliances. In the United States, commentators on progressive networks began to draw parallels between Africa's economic independence movement and America's own forgotten struggles, the civil rights era, the anti-war protests, the moral awakening of the 1960s. The same media that called Martin Luther King a troublemaker, one host noted, now calls African leaders radicals for saying they deserve to own their own gold. It was an uncomfortable comparison, but a necessary one. Madam President's interview became a quiet sensation among American audiences, over 60, many of whom still remembered Mandela's imprisonment, Vietnam's chaos, and the headlines that once distorted both. Her story reminded them that truth too can be colonized, and that courage sometimes comes wearing an unfamiliar accent. From Europe, reactions were mixed. Germany remained defensive over its colonial past. France, weary from losing influence in the Sahel, issued polite but distant statements. But in Latin America, her words found resonance. Leaders in Bolivia and Venezuela quoted her in public speeches, praising her call for a multipolar world of dignity. And while the global media tried to move on, a quiet consensus began to form that Africa's new liberation was no longer a fringe idea, it was a growing reality. As one American columnist wrote, "Namibia may be small, but its president has just given the global South a language for resistance that sounds like peace." And that is perhaps the most revolutionary thing of all, that in a world shouting about power, a woman once called a terrorist could whisper about fairness and still move the planet. The camera lingers on her face for a few seconds after the final question. There's no triumphant smile, no grand gesture, just a calm stillness. The kind that comes from surviving storms and outliving lies. "You are calling me Madame President," she had said at the beginning. Now, as the lights fade, that line echoes differently. It is no longer about her. It is about us, about a continent reclaiming its narrative, and a generation refusing to be defined by its oppressors. In her closing remarks, she warns gently, "We are living in a world of tension, of conflict, of competition for resources. But if Africa loses her moral compass now, future generations will not forgive us." It is both a prophecy and a plea. She is not promising easy victories. She is reminding Africa and the world that freedom once achieved must still be protected from within. The second colonization, she suggests, will not come with armies, but with contracts, algorithms, and dependency disguised as friendship. And yet her hope remains unbroken. This wave, she says softly, will pass. And when it does, may our children say that we did not bow. That single sentence transforms the interview into something larger, a spiritual checkpoint in Africa's journey towards self-respect. It resonates with every Burkina Faso farmer defending his land, every Ghanaian youth demanding fair wages, every South African worker remembering what Mandela stood for. It even reaches across oceans to Black Americans watching from their living rooms, nodding quietly because they too know what it means to be mislabeled for standing tall. The story of Madam President is not one of anger, but of arrival. It is about a woman and a continent no longer asking permission to exist with dignity. As the screen fades to black, the narrator's voice returns one last time. They called her a terrorist. Now she teaches the world peace. They called her dangerous. Now she calls for justice. And maybe that's what scares them most, that Africa is finally speaking in her own voice. Then comes the question every viewer must answer. Can Africa remain free if the world refuses to see her as equal? If you believe the answer is yes, if you believe that truth has no accent and courage has no gender, share this story. Because silence is no longer an option. Please share if you feel that you are one of the first to know and support leaders like President Ibrahim Traoré and Madame Nandi-Ndaitwah, voices of a free Africa. Subscribe if you believe that the truth is more important than the headlines. Because history, once again, is whispering from Africa, and this time, the world is finally listening.